118 former Conservative politicians have crossed over to Reform UK. That number includes the Home Secretary, who presided over 745,000 net migration, the highest in British history, and the Immigration Minister, who sat beside her while it happened. Both now wear a turquoise rosette and talk about controlling Britain's borders with a straight face. If you voted Reform to get away from the Tories, and I respect that, genuinely, you might want to know that 5 out of 8 sitting Reform MPs are former Conservatives, so over half of them. Now, there's a quote from Farage himself from June 2024, where he warned, and these are his words, that Tory defectors were the most poisonous thing that ever happened to UKIP. He said they brought constant warfare and backstabbing. 18 months later, he was holding weekly defection press conferences with fireworks and standing ovations. Everyone thinks Farage is anti-establishment. The man who pulls in over £1 million a year in side jobs, ran his own party as a private limited company. He literally owned shares in. And his closest advisor, a man he calls like a son, was arrested on 21 federal charges, including money laundering conspiracy, pleaded guilty to wire fraud, and is now publishing a book called How to Launder Money. But sure, man of the people. Right, everything I'm about to show you comes from public records, Companies House, TheyWorkForYou, the Electoral Commission, the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner, VoteWatch Europe. You can check every single claim for yourself. I'll link as much as I can below. And that matters, because what you're about to hear should really make you furious. And it should make you furious, also because it's true. Let's start with the thing that most Reform voters can already feel in their gut, but haven't really seen the full picture on, because the numbers are a lot worse than you think. Best for Britain's defection tracker has now logged 118 former Conservative politicians who've crossed to Reform. That includes 5 sitting MPs who crossed the floor in Parliament, roughly 18 former MPs, 81 serving councillors who used to wear a blue rosette, 2 members of the Senedd, an MSP, a peer, a London Assembly member, a police and crime commissioner. And it didn't happen slowly. Lee Anderson went first, March 2024. He'd been suspended from the Tory whip, so fair enough, he had a reason. Then, nothing much for over a year. Danny Kruger in September 2025. Then, January 2026 hit, and the dam broke. 3 MPs crossed the floor in 11 days. Jenrick, Rosendale, Braverman, bang, bang, bang. Now, you might think, so what? People switch parties, happens all the time. Right. But look at who switched and what they actually did in government, because this is where your blood might start boiling a bit. Suella Braverman was Home Secretary from September 2022 to November 2023. That is the precise window when net migration hit 745,000, roughly 3 times what it was before Brexit. 3 times under her watch. She was sacked twice, once for sharing cabinet documents from her personal email, once for publishing an article in The Times without Downing Street's permission. She tried to get civil servants to arrange a private speed awareness course so nobody would recognise her. She called rough sleeping a lifestyle choice. And here's what Reform voters specifically need to know. Her voting record on TheyWorkForYou shows she almost always voted for COVID-19 restrictions. 17 votes for lockdowns, 1 against. She consistently voted for higher taxes to fund health and social care, including the national insurance levy that Reform's entire platform attacks. Reform built massive support from anti-lockdown and anti-tax sentiment. Their new star recruit voted for both. Right. But Braverman's just one. Wait till you hear about the bloke who settled a £5 million tax bill while running HMRC. HMRC. Nadhim Zahawi served as Chancellor of the Exchequer under Boris Johnson. He was sacked as Tory party chairman in January 2023 after it came out that he'd settled approximately £4.8 to £5 million with HMRC, including a 30% penalty, over his use of Balshore Investments, a Gibraltar-registered offshore company linked to his family to hold shares in YouGov. Let that sink in. Thanks, Elon. He was settling a multi-million-pound tax dispute while serving as the minister in charge of the tax authority. That is genuinely, spectacularly brazen. And the man's previous comments about Farage are, well, there's something. In 2015, Zahawi tweeted, "I'm not British born, Mr. Farage. Your comments are offensive and racist, and I would be frightened to live in a country run by you." He compared Farage's rhetoric to that of Joseph Goebbels. Those tweets were later conveniently deleted. At his defection press conference in January 2026, he said, "Britain needs Nigel Farage as Prime Minister." Both men reportedly laughed when asked about the old tweets. Farage's defence of Zahawi's tax situation: "There's nobody with a complex business empire that does not have to have some kind of negotiation at some point with HMRC. That is how the world works." Brilliant anti-establishment energy there, Nigel. Really sticking it to the elites. A Sky News analysis put it plainly. Adding Zahawi made reform look awfully like Boris Johnson's version of the Conservative Party. A former Tory cabinet minister was more blunt. He called the whole thing "same team, new badge." Ha! And then there's Jenrick. Because Reform's own chairman told you, publicly on social media, exactly who was responsible for Britain's asylum scandal, and then both those people joined his party. Robert Jenrick was Immigration Minister from October 2022 to December 2023, the same period as Braverman's tenure. The same record-breaking migration figures. Under his watch, the asylum backlog hit a record 172,758, up 57% year on year. The Home Office forecast 360,000 skilled workers visas over 3 years. They issued 931,000 in that window, nearly 3 times what they'd planned for. In July 2025, Reform's own head of policy, Zia Yusuf, posted on X, 24,000 Afghans secretly granted asylum, costing British taxpayers up to £7 billion. The government covered it up. Who was in government? Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick. Both of those people joined his party within 6 months. Yusuf also joked that the list of former Tory ministers who should defect to Reform is shorter than the list that should probably be in jail. Adding one more layer of comedy, Yusuf himself was a paid-up Conservative Party member until August 2024. So the man attacking Tory defectors was a more recent Tory than some of the people he was attacking. And the punchline to the whole thing? Just weeks after joining Reform, both Braverman and Jenrick accidentally voted with Labour to scrap the 2-child benefit cap, directly against Reform's position, because they walked into the wrong division lobby and got trapped when the doors locked. They reportedly tried to phone Farage for instructions. Kemi Badenoch's response: "They're Nigel's problem now." Now, remember, Farage himself warned against exactly this. June 2024, the most poisonous thing that ever happened to UKIP. He said Tory defectors brought warfare and backstabbing and destroyed the party. Then he did it at vastly greater scale. And if you think the defection numbers are bad, wait until you see the pattern behind the man himself, because this is the 3rd time he's done this. Farage has quit leadership roles at least 5 times across 3 different parties. That sentence alone should give anyone good reason to pause. But the details are a bit mad. UKIP, founding member, 1993. First leadership from September 2006. Resigned September 2009 to focus on his parliamentary campaign. Second leadership from November 2010. Resigned May 2015 after failing to win South Thanet. Then was reinstated 3 days later after the NEC unanimously rejected his resignation. Resigned again July 2016 after the referendum, saying, "I want my life back." Briefly came back as interim leader when his successor Diane James quit after 18 days, having signed her acceptance document Vicom Actus, which is Latin for under duress. That alone is worth the price of admission. Finally quit UKIP entirely in December 2018. And what happened to the party he'd spent 25 years building? 7 leaders in roughly 3 years. Lurched to the far right. Scored 0 seats in the 2019 European elections. Now, politically irrelevant. The LSE described it as a largely one-man show. When he left, it collapsed. Not just because Brexit was done, but because the party had no institutional depth beyond one man's personality. That's party number one, left in ruins. Now on to party number two. The Brexit Party, created in 2019 specifically to pressure the government, won the European elections spectacularly. 31% of the vote, 29 seats, remarkable achievement. Then Farage strategically withdrew candidates from over 300 Conservative seats in the December 2019 general election, handing Boris Johnson a landslide on a silver platter. The Brexit Party won 0 Westminster seats. Once Brexit was done, Farage simply renamed it Reform UK and moved on. No attempt to build on the success. No institutional legacy, just next project. Reform UK. Farage stepped down as leader in March 2021 and told the world he was retiring from politics. Richard Tice took over. The party sat at 1 to 3% in the polls. Then in May 2024, Farage explicitly said he would not stand as an MP. He'd focus on helping Trump's campaign instead. Weeks later, on the 3rd of June 2024, he reversed himself entirely, became Reform leader and a parliamentary candidate. I won't be changing my mind again, I can promise you that. That was 2016. He's changed his mind, I think 5 times now, since then. And there's this one. I have never been, and I never wanted to be, a career politician. Said by a man who's been in politics continuously since 1993. That's 33 years. Even by Westminster standards, that qualifies as a career. Right, so the pattern is, build a movement around yourself, use it for whatever purpose you need, then walk away when it stops being useful. UKIP collapsed, the Brexit Party was discarded. The question is whether reform is next. But before we get to that, you need to see how the party itself was structured, because the structure tells you everything about who it was built for. Reform UK was incorporated on the 23rd of November 2018. It was a private company limited by shares, not a political party in any normal sense, a privately limited company. Farage held 53% of the shares, 8 out of 15, giving him personal majority control over the entire operation. After he removed Chief Executive Paul Oakden in August 24, his stake rose to approximately 60%. Richard Tice held roughly a third. And the members? The people paying their 25 quid a year, 0 voting rights. Couldn't vote on leadership, couldn't vote on policy, couldn't vote on constitutional changes, couldn't challenge or remove the leader, couldn't block anything, couldn't do anything, really, except volunteer and check an app. Compare that to any other party. Labour members elect their leader through 1 member, 1 vote, and vote on policy at annual conference. Conservative members choose their leader from an MP shortlist. Lib Dem conference motions carry binding votes. In Reform UK, 25 quid a year got you less democratic participation than a Tesco club card gets you in influencing store layouts. Professor Richard Murphy put it plainly. Nigel Farage tries to pose as if he's the people's choice, but the fact is, the Reform Party is totally undemocratic. It's actually a private, limited company controlled by him and his agenda. Open Britain's analysis in November 25 went further. Reform UK isn't a political party. It's a business. Their warning was stark. Everyday donors are told they are backing a grassroots rebellion. In reality, they are funneling money into a private corporate structure controlled by a small, wealthy inner circle. Now, in February 2025, after Farage promised to hand control to members, ownership was transferred to Reform 2025 Limited, a company limited by guarantee with no shareholders. Sounds like progress. But the 2 directors and guarantors, Nigel Farage and Zia Youssef, and Farage still maintains the ability to appoint the majority of Reform's executive board. So the man who campaigned to give the people their vote back from the EU ran his own party as a private company where the people had no vote at all, and the restructure didn't fundamentally change that. The party structure is pretty mad. But wait until you see how much of this man of the people is actually pulling in, because the money situation is genuinely eye-watering. Nigel Farage represents Clacton, just a bit down the road from me. Quick bit of context, Clacton has the highest rate of economic inactivity in England. Deprivation, jobs shortage, overstretched schools and GPs. That's his constituency. That's who sent him to Parliament. Here's what he's been doing with his time. GB News. His company, Thorn in the Side Limited, brilliant name, receives approximately 97 grand per month. Per month from GB News. So that's roughly 1.2 million quid a year for about 32 hours of work per month. The income goes through the company, so he pays 25% corporation tax instead of 40% income tax. Since being elected MP in July 2024, he's declared over £394,900 from GB News alone. Direct bullion. Brand ambassador for a gold dealer. One payment of £189,000 in December 2024. Another £135,000 in October 2025 for 12 hours work. Total from direct bullion in 2025, over £415,000. Cameo. Here's the one that sticks. Farage recorded just under 2,000 personalised cameo videos in his first year as an MP, earning over £134,000. He made 45 speeches in Parliament. That's more than 40 cameo videos for every single speech in the Commons. His constituents in Clacton need jobs, and their MP is recording birthday messages at 75 quid a pop. I'm a Celebrity, November 2023. Remember that? Reported fee, £1.5 million, the highest in the show's history. Works out to about £68,000 per episode, nearly double the average UK annual salary. And that's just the current income. There's also the EU pension, which is, well, you'll love this. Despite spending decades campaigning against the European Union, Farage will collect an estimated £73,000 a year from his EU pension starting April next year. He also joined a voluntary top-up scheme that could bring his total to £164,000 or more per year for life. He called it a contractual entitlement, which is technically true in the same way that claiming expenses for a duck house is technically allowed. Total estimated first-year earnings as an MP? Over £1 million, making him the highest-earning MP in Parliament. And in January 2026, the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards found he'd failed to declare nearly £400,000 in earnings on time. His defence, and I need you to hear this in his voice, was, "I don't do computers, so I rely on other people to do those things for me." Let me know in the comments what you thought of my impression. Anyway, so he also told the Commissioner, "I'm not making any money as a result of being an MP, quite the opposite. I'm making it because I'm Nigel Farage, and I've got other interests." The man who can't be bothered to file his earnings on time represents one of the most deprived constituencies in England. A Clacton voter named Sarah Corner told journalists, "It feels like he's just cashing in. Clacton has huge issues: deprivation, job shortage, schools and doctors oversubscribed. I've not heard Farage speak about that." He mentioned his own constituency just 4 times in Commons speeches during his first year. He initially refused to hold face-to-face constituency surgeries, claiming the Speaker's office advised against it. The Speaker's office denied giving any such advice. Right, so that's the money he made as an MP. But he was also collecting a salary from Europe for over 2 decades, which raises the obvious question: what did he actually do in the European Parliament? The answer is quite staggering. Farage was a member of the European Parliament for 21 years from 1999 to 2020. He represented South East England. His voting attendance rate, 36.88%. That made him the 11th worst out of all 751 MEPs from 28 countries. By another measure, he ranked 745th out of 745. For comparison, Labour's Derek Vaughan had 98.7% attendance over the same period. Number of motions, reports, or amendments to his name? 0. Written questions after the Brexit referendum? 1. Estimated total salary and expenses over his career? £4 to £5 million. In 2009, he admitted his expenses alone were pushing £2 million over his first decade, not including his salary. He was fined approximately €40,000 after auditors found his parliamentary assistant was not doing genuine EU work but was instead serving as UKIP's national nominating officer. So EU taxpayers were funding UKIP party operations. Marvellous. But the Fisheries Committee. The Fisheries Committee is, honestly, it's the single best metaphor for everything wrong with this man's approach to public service. Because the sheer brass neck of it is almost admirable. Farage sat on the EU Parliament's Fisheries Committee. He attended one meeting out of 42. That is a 2.4% attendance rate. During 3 major votes to reform the common fisheries policy, he was in the building but failed to vote. When LBC's Ian Dale confronted him about this, his response was because he wanted to leave the European Union. Right, so his position was, I won't do the job because I disagree with the institution. Fair enough as a philosophical stance, except he was still cashing the cheques. And then this is the part that should make every fisherman in Britain absolutely livid. During the 2016 referendum campaign, he led a flotilla of fishing boats down the Thames to highlight the plight of British fishermen under EU fishing policy, the very policy he'd been paid to scrutinise and had done nothing about. After Brexit, British shellfish exports to the EU were blocked by a law brought in during 2008, when Farage was the British MEP on the Fisheries Committee, and could have raised concerns. He didn't, because he wasn't there, because he attended one meeting in 4 years, getting paid millions to not even show up for work, then campaigning against the institution that's paying you. Does that sound like anti-establishment to you? That is, by any objective measure, one of the most successful grifts in European political history. So the work record in Europe is dire. The money is eye-watering. The party's a private company. The Tory defections are off the charts. But we haven't even talked about the foreign connections yet. And there's a photograph he'd rather you didn't see. This photograph shows Nigel Farage at the Russian embassy with Ambassador Alexander Yakovenko on the 13th of May 2013. In June 2018, he said, "I've never met the Russian ambassador." The photo exists. He's denied the meeting. That's not a matter of interpretation. The Guardian documented at least 17 appearances on Russia Today from December 2010 onwards. RT themselves called Farage one of their special and endlessly quotable British guests, boasting that he has been known far longer to the RT audience than most of the British electorate. In 2014, when asked about which world leader he most admired, Farage named Vladimir Putin as an operator. In June 2024, he stated that NATO and the EU had provoked Russia's invasion of Ukraine by expanding eastwards. Bad enough from a party leader. But then there's what happened with his Welsh party leader, because that story ended with a prison sentence. Nathan Gill, Reform UK's leader in Wales, a former UKIP and Brexit Party MEP, pleaded guilty in September 2025 to 8 counts of bribery. He'd taken approximately £40,000 from a pro-Russian Ukrainian politician to make pro-Russian statements in the European Parliament. He was sentenced to 10.5 years. Byline Times reported that at a September 2014 plenary session, both Gill and Farage made nearly identical statements about Ukraine. Farage called Gill a bad apple. At what point does the barrel become the problem? Then there's Aaron Banks, UKIP's biggest donor, who gave approximately £8 to £9 million to Leave.eu. Banks and his aide, Andy Wigmore, had multiple meetings with Russian officials at the Russian embassy. The ambassador offered Banks cheap access to shares in a Russian mining company. The Electoral Commission found reasonable grounds to suspect. Banks was not the true source of the £8 million. The NCA dropped its investigation, but the Electoral Commission took the extraordinary step of publicly criticising that decision. The Intelligence and Security Committee's Russia report found the government had made no effort to investigate potential Russian influence on the Brexit vote. And on the other side of the Atlantic, Farage was the first foreign politician to visit Trump Tower after the 2016 election. He's spoken at Trump rallies. He attended the Republican National Convention in July 2024, days after winning Clacton, with £32,000 in flights and accommodation paid by crypto investor Christopher Harborne. He's made at least 9 trips abroad since becoming an MP, 8 of them to the United States. A quarter of women surveyed cited his support for Trump as their main reason not to vote reform. Speaking of Christopher Harborne, you should probably know who's actually paying for all of this, because the People's Army has a very short list of funders, and they don't exactly live in Clacton. 75% of all the money Reform has ever received came from three men: Christopher Harborne, Jeremy Hosking, and Richard Tice. Together, they've provided £23 million of the £30 million donated since 2019. Harborne alone gave £9 million in September 2025, the largest single political donation by a living individual in British political history. He's based in Thailand. 2/3 of 2024 donations came from millionaires and multimillionaires. Over half came from people with homes in low-tax jurisdictions or offshore business interests. Other notable donors include Fiona Watson, that's George Cottrell's mum, who gave £750,000. Nick Candy, the billionaire luxury property developer. Claudia Harmsworth, wife of the Daily Mail owner, and a Monaco-based former Lehman Brothers banker. Transparency International warned that this concentration shows politics risks becoming an exclusive club, which is a polite way of saying the People's Army is funded by a Thai-based crypto investor, a Monaco banker, and a bloke whose mother gave £750,000. Tremendously grassroots. Oh, and speaking of Cottrell's mum, let's talk about Cottrell himself. Because this is the point in the video where, if you haven't already, you're probably going to say, you cannot be serious. George Cottrell, aristocratic background, raised on Mustique. Farage describes him as like a son to me. He's the inner circle, the right-hand man. In 2016, Cottrell was arrested at the Republican National Convention on 21 federal charges, including conspiracy to commit money laundering and wire fraud. He pleaded guilty to one count, served 8 months in an American prison. He reportedly lost £16 million in a single night at poker and made over $200 million copying bets from a gambling syndicate. He lives in a luxury coastal resort in Montenegro. HMRC reportedly launched a scoping investigation into his tax affairs in 2025. And he's publishing a book next month. The title, and I promise I'm not making it up, is How to Launder Money. The man was arrested on 21 federal charges, including money laundering conspiracy. He pleaded guilty to wire fraud, specifically for explaining to undercover agents how criminal proceeds could be laundered. His book is called How to Launder Money. You could not get that past a television scriptwriter. They'd send it back for being too on the nose. Now, by this point, the evidence is piling up. But here's the thing. It isn't just journalists and researchers who've noticed. Reform's own voters are noticing too, and there's academic data to prove it. Dr. Matthew Barnfield at Queen Mary University of London published research in February 2026 using YouGov data. His findings: significantly fewer people now see Reform and the Conservatives as different parties, a 10 percentage point drop since September 2025. And 17% of Reform's own supporters say the defections have made them more negative about the party. That's the highest figure for any party's supporters reacting negatively to their own party's actions. And here's why that matters structurally. Reform's growth was driven substantially by people who didn't vote at all in 2024, the non-voters. That's the demographic most vulnerable to walking away. As Barnfield put it, populist parties are especially vulnerable because their voters share disillusionment with non-voters. Coming to look like Tory Party 2.0 might not stop Reform from bringing over Conservative voters, but it does risk losing the people who joined because Reform looked completely different from the status quo. The party that succeeded by being different from the Tories is now, by measurable polling data, becoming indistinguishable from them. That's quite the achievement. So what do you do with all this? Because there's a real risk in just raging about the problem with no alternative. Fortunately, someone already looked at what Reform was becoming and said, absolutely not. And they've built something that specifically rejects everything we've just talked about. Rupert Lowe was the Reform MP for Great Yarmouth, elected in 2024. Former investment banker, Morgan Grenfell, Deutsche Bank, Barings, and businessman, estimated net worth of £30 million. Genuine private sector background that Farage, who's been in politics since 1993, doesn't have. In January 2025, Elon Musk publicly suggested Lowe should replace Farage as Reform leader. By March, Lowe told the Daily Mail that Reform was a protest party led by the Messiah and questioned whether Farage would make a good Prime Minister. He was suspended within 2 days. Reform alleged verbal threats and serious bullying. Lowe denied everything. His entire 7-person parliamentary team wrote a public letter supporting him. The CPS found insufficient evidence for any charges. Leaked WhatsApp messages showed Farage calling Lowe contemptible and disgusting. Patrick O'Flynn, writing in The Spectator, described a familiar pattern. A politician in a Farage party becomes so popular as to threaten his supremacy and then gets chopped off at the knees. Restore Britain launched a formal political party on the 13th of February 2026. Musk endorsed it directly. Join Rupert Lowe in Restore Britain because he is the only one who will actually do it. The launch post got 2.4 million views within hours. Ben Habib's Advance UK, roughly 40,000 members, announced a long-term plan to merge. And here's the comparison that matters, and I'll let it speak for itself. Farage promised a grooming gangs inquiry, never delivered. Lowe crowdfunded one, raised over £700,000 from more than 20,000 contributors, and ran it. Identified 85 affected local authorities. Farage earns over £1 million a year in side jobs. Lowe donates his entire net MP salary to local causes in Great Yarmouth. Reform absorbs former Conservative chancellors, Home Secretaries and immigration ministers. Restore Britain explicitly rejects them. Their policy is no failed ministers, no career politicians, candidates drawn from business, military and industry. Lowe's launch video took direct aim at the defection problem. Britain does not need tinkering minor reform around the edges, not carefully curated cosmetic changes, just this time with the same failed ministers wearing a turquoise rosette. It needs restoration. A Find Out Now poll showed Restore Britain at 10% in a hypothetical election scenario, and that was before it was even a formal party. The challenges are real. Vote splitting is a genuine risk, there's no electoral track record yet, and Reform has vastly more resources. But 10% as a starting position, Musk's backing, and the Advance UK merger represent more than most new parties could dream of. Now, I'm not going to tell you what to think about Restore Britain. I'm not your dad. But if you sat through this video and you're thinking, right, so what am I supposed to do instead? It exists, and it specifically rejects every single thing we've just discussed. The link is below. Make up your own mind. I've also made a video on the whole topic, so you could watch that as well. Right, so let's pull this all together. Nigel Farage built his entire brand on being the anti-establishment outsider. The bloke down the pub who'd sort it all out. If you agree that Reform has a Farage problem, the question is what comes next. Splitting the right-wing vote is a real risk, but so is giving your vote to a party that's becoming the thing you've voted against. That's a decision that only you can make, but you deserve to make it with the full picture in front of you. And now you've got it. Link to Restore Britain is below if you want to take a look at what they're proposing, and seriously, just judge for yourself. And if you think other Reform voters deserve to see this, then please share it, not because I told you to, but because they're entitled to the same information that you've just had. Everything in this video comes from public records, Companies House, TheyWorkForYou, the Electoral Commission, the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner, VoteWatch Europe. You don't actually have to take my word for it. You could just look it all up for yourself. And honestly, I really encourage you to. I'm limited to how many links I can put down there, but I've started you off basically. So subscribe if you want more of this. We've got more to say, and some of it is going to make today genuinely look mild.